What's this? A letter for me.
Welcome to another episode of Remember the Great Sports Through the Mail Thursdays. Today I'm going to share with you some recent returns in 3 envelopes that I just got back. So I'm just going to jump right into them and we'll see who we got. Alright. This first one is postmarked from Texas. And it is a return from former Milwaukee Brave, Al Spangler, / Houston Colt 45 Astro, and we'll talk about that in a second, California Angel, and Chicago Cub on 4. So I kind of got a nice variety of his whole career there, it appears. Well, Al Spangler grew up in Pennsylvania. He played high school baseball. He batted left and threw left. So lefty-lefty combo. He had an opportunity to sign a professional contract out of high school. However, he chose to attend Duke University instead. Well, he got national attention after his junior year at Duke University because he batted .406 for the Blue Devils baseball team and became an All-American. After his tenure in college, he was drafted by the Milwaukee Braves. Alright, so after he was drafted by the Milwaukee Braves, he spent 1954 and 55 in the Braves minor league system. However, in 1956 and 57, he was in the military and did not play in baseball at all. Now, I am not sure at all if he played on a baseball team while in the military. However, he did not have 2 years of stats when he was 22 and 23 years old, which were in his development years. Well, in 1958, he was able to return to baseball, and he spent that year in AAA for the Milwaukee Braves. Followed that by 1959 with the majority of the season in AAA with a call-up for 6 games with the Braves. Well, after that call-up, he would stay with the Braves, top corner, for a couple more seasons. He appeared in 101 games and batted .267. However, he didn't hit any home runs. Well, the following year, it appears that he only appeared in 68 games, and I don't know if that was due to injury or if it was kind of like a platoon thing, being he was a lefty hitter. However, after the 1960 season, or 61 season, he was drafted in the expansion draft by the Houston Colt 45s. Well, the Houston Colt 45s came into the league along with the Mets that year, and they were a pretty abysmal team, to say it nicely. But here's the historical fact about Mr. Spangler, who also became a Houston Astro, which is what the Colt 45s were originally known as. Mr. Spangler is the first player ever in the history of the Houston Colt 45s or Houston Astros to drive in a run. So Al Spangler is credited with the first RBI in the history of Houston Astros / Colt 45s history. Well, after a few seasons in Houston, up until 1965, it was decided the Astros wanted to part ways with Mr. Spangler, and he was traded to the California Angels for Don Lee. Well, after completing the 1965 season, he went into spring training with the Angels, and they sent him down to the minor leagues for the majority of the 66 season. He only appeared in 6 games. Well, after the 66 season, the California Angels let Spangler go, and he then went and signed with the Chicago Cubs. He spent from 1967 playing in AAA, about half the season in 67 with the Cubs. From 1967, 68, and 69 being a part-time player. And in 1970, the Chicago Cubs sent him down as well as he split the season between the majors and the minors. Well, in 1971, it appears that he only appeared in 5 games total that year, and I don't know, from what it looks like, he didn't appear in any minor league games, and the Cubs released him from his contract. So, in total, he played a total of 13 years in the majors. Primarily, he was a platoon type player, with the lefty bat. However, while he was with the Colt 45s, he did start in many games because they were a pretty bad franchise at the time. So I'm very happy to get Mr. Spangler's autograph back in my collection. All right, this next one is postmarked from Oklahoma. And it is former knuckleballer Eddie Fisher on 1, 2, 3, and I had a 4th one in there that he did not sign. I guess maybe 3 is the limit, or he just doesn't sign duplicates, not really sure. But Eddie Fisher. So as you can see, Eddie Fisher was a White Sox. He also was a Baltimore Oriole and a Cleveland Indian. So Eddie Fisher, a pitcher out of Oklahoma. He pitched his high school baseball in Oklahoma and also attended the University of Oklahoma in Norman as a pitcher as well. He was drafted out of the University of Oklahoma and spent some time in the minor leagues, not a whole lot. He spent his first season in Double-A at 21 years old. Then the following year, he was up in the majors where he split time between the San Francisco Giants and the AAA affiliate of the Giants. He would be up and down with the Giants all the way through 1961 until the 1962 season when he landed with the Chicago White Sox and basically was kind of like a long reliever swingman out of the bullpen for them. He started 12 games that year. Well, Eddie Fisher was a knuckleballer. So, as many of you may or may not know about the history of knuckleball pitchers, they tend to last a long time in their career because it doesn't give the wear and tear on the shoulder and the arm like a regular fire thrower pitcher that throws fastballs. So, Fisher pitched all the way until 36 years old. He actually spent 15 seasons in the majors. And we're going to talk about one of those seasons here in a minute. Well, he made the All-Star team one year, and he was dominant, to say the least, that season. He was 15 wins and 7 losses, and he had an ERA just over 2, and he appeared in 82 games out of the bullpen for the Chicago White Sox. Well, he went to his one and only All-Star game that year, and he closed out the 1965 All-Star game for the American League, striking out the likes of Roberto Clemente and Hank Aaron, I believe. So that's a pretty impressive lineup to shut down, that's for sure, especially to close the game out in that type of situation. Well, the following year, the Chicago White Sox brought him back, and I'm guessing that maybe it was a compensation issue. They traded him to the Baltimore Orioles mid-season. Well, that season, the Baltimore Orioles would go on to win the World Series. Thus, Eddie Fisher got his World Championship title with the Baltimore Orioles that year. He would only spend one more season with Baltimore, where he had a pretty fair record, appearing in 44 games. And then he would move on to the Cleveland Indians, which this card indicates. He would spend only one season with Cleveland before he landed himself in with the California Angels. He pitched through the 1972 season with the California Angels. Then the team that he had his most success with, the Chicago White Sox, brought him back for the 72 and 73 season. As a matter of fact, in the 73 season, the White Sox brought him back as a starter. At the age of 36 years old, he again starting games for the White Sox. Well, the following year, actually that same year in 73, he was traded to the St. Louis Cardinals as well. So after the 73 season, he had a very good ERA with the Cardinals with a dismal 1.29 actually, with St. Louis. But despite that success in St. Louis, he decided to retire from baseball. Well, after he retired, he moved back to his native Oklahoma, and that's where he currently is living to this day. So thank you, Mr. Fisher. I appreciate adding your autograph to my collection. All right, this last one is postmarked from St. Louis, Missouri, which I'm all familiar with. And it is former Chicago Cub great and St. Louis Cardinal great George Altman on 1, 2, 3, and 4. The bottom 2 Cubs cards are the same. The top 2 are Jello cards or Post cards. I believe one's Jello and one's Post cereal. As you can see, they use the same picture. So, very cool, even though they're about a year apart. But I'm not going to complain. I paid very little for the cards, probably 50 cents or less. So, not a big deal for autographs. So, George Altman, like Al Spangler, Altman lost a year to military service. He served in the United States military while he was a minor league baseball player. Well, Altman actually got his first taste of playing baseball for the Negro Leagues back in 1955 for the Kansas City Monarchs. He was a very young man at that time. This is a left-handed hitting outfielder that threw right-handed. And he only spent 3 months with the Monarchs before he decided to go to college and play college baseball. Altman played his college baseball at Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee. He was drafted by the Chicago Cubs out of Tennessee State University. However, in 1956, which was shortly after the time he spent in the Negro Leagues, he only spent 1 year with the Cubs minor league affiliate before he served in the military in 1957. Well, in 1958, he returned from his military service and spent another year in the minor leagues for the Cubs. Well, in 1959, he got his break and he appeared in 135 games for the Cubs, playing primarily in the outfield. Well, he had a very solid rookie season where, he batted .245 and hit 12 home runs. But you could see the improvement in his game. Well, the next year, he appeared in 119 games for the Cubs. But in 1961 and 62, Altman would have a couple breakout seasons. First of all, in 1961, he led the league in triples. So that tells me that he was a very good base runner. Second, he batted over .300 and hit 27 home runs for the Chicago Cubs in Wrigley Field. Well, he appeared in his first of 3 All-Star games, and in 1961, that was one of the years that they had played 2 All-Star games, for whatever reason. Maybe somebody can give me the history on that. And in 1962, he didn't miss a beat and appeared in his 3rd All-Star game, and appeared in 147 games, batting a career-high .313 for the Chicago Cubs. Well, the Cardinals, liking what they saw with the Cubs, actually traded for Altman in the offseason of 1962. The Cardinals sent Larry Jackson and Lindy McDaniel to the Cubs in return for Altman. Well, his time in St. Louis was very short-lived, as he only spent 1 season in St. Louis. However, he had a respectable .274 batting average. However, the home run totals were not worth what they were the previous year. Well, after the 63 season, the Cardinals sent him packing to the New York Mets for pitcher Roger Craig, who would later become the manager of the San Francisco Giants. Altman spent the 64 season with the New York Mets, and after the 64 season concluded, he returned to his familiar home in the friendly confines of Wrigley Field. He was traded in the offseason by the Mets back to the Chicago Cubs for Billy Cowan. So Altman, at 32 years old, would come back to the Cubs. He would appear in games in 1965, 1966. However, in 1967, he would only appear in 18 games and spent primarily most of the season in the minor leagues for the Cubs. Well, after the 1967 season, after his time in the majors, he was one of the first major leaguers to go overseas to play in Japanese professional baseball. Well, he had a couple successful seasons playing in Japanese professional baseball, and finally, after 8 seasons playing for the Tokyo Lot Orions and the Hansen Tigers, he retired from baseball. Well, his time overseas were pretty impressive. He led the Pacific League in hits one season, RBIs another season. He was also named to the All-Star teams in the Pacific League, and I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm guessing that he might be one of the very few to have played in Japanese professional baseball, the major leagues, and the Negro Leagues. That's a stat that I bet nobody else has. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the historians that are watching this, but I'm pretty sure I never read about a former Negro Leaguer that also played in the majors, that also played in Japan. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode. Thank you, Mr. Altman. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. And thank you, Mr. Spangler, for signing for me. I did not have your autographs at all. Actually, I think I have gotten Altman before, but the other ones I had not before. So I'm very happy to add these all-star caliber players to my collection. Thank you very much for joining me for another episode, and I look forward to your comments below.